Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to all of you to our debate Towards Transatlantic Partnership, the role of digital transformation. Today's event is co-hosted by EIF Chair Pilar del Castillo, MEP with the EPP Group from Spain, member of the ITRE Committee and of the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in a Digital Age, and by EIF member Liesje Schreinemacher, who's an MEP with the Renew Europe Group from the Netherlands, member of the INTA Committee and of the European Parliament Delegation for Relations with the United States. A warm welcome to both of you, and thank you very much for taking the lead on this important and timely debate at our forum. Today, we're also joined by 4 experts to discuss the important role of a collaborative transatlantic partnership, which may lead to new areas of cooperation with the new US administration. Peter Linton, Senior Fellow and co-founder of the Transatlantic Policy Network in 1992, and co-founder of the EIF in 2000, as well as author of numerous seminal reports for both organizations over many years. Welcome, Peter. Yeah. We'll be also joined by Stephen Anderson, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Communications and Information Policy in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs, US Department of State. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you very much for joining us. And we'll be joined also by Nate Tibbits, Senior Vice President of Global Government Affairs and Public Affairs at Qualcomm. And we also expect Rupert Schlegelmilch, Director of the Americas Agriculture and Food Safety at DigiTrade European Commission, who will join us in a moment. So thank you all very much for being here with us today. With no further ado, let me give the floor to start with Pilar del Castillo, and after Pilar to Liesje Schreinemacher for their opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Maria Rosa, and well, happy to be here with my colleague Liesje Schreinemacher and with the rest of the speakers. To most of them, most of them I know really quite well. Well, dear colleagues and EIF members, it is a pleasure to be here today, as I said, co-sharing this debate on transatlantic partnership and digital transformation. Clearly, it is urgent to establish a common digital transatlantic vision, not only because the transatlantic space is really the heart of the global digital economy. Let us not forget that North America and Europe generate 75% of global digital content, and the transatlantic data flows continue to grow exponentially and accounts for over 1/2 of the global data flows. But more importantly, because the need for global cooperation on digitalization goes beyond the hardware and the software. It is also about our common values, political culture, and societies. With this context in mind, the Commission published on the 2nd of December the communication on a new transatlantic agenda and called to launch an EU-US summit in the first half of 2021. Seems that finally the EU-US summit will be launched on the 15th of June in Brussels with the presence of President Biden. This first fully fledged EU-US summit since 2014 is indeed good news. It's clear that we want and we must start discussions on digitalization as soon as possible. Many are the issues where the clock is ticking. For example, how to tackle harmful markets behaviors from online platforms, illegal content, or algorithm-fueled propagation of hate speech and disinformation. Unfair taxation is another issue in the digital economy, an area where the EU and the US should strongly commit to the timely conclusion of discussions on a global solution within the context of OECD and G20. Accordingly, and I think it is imperative to discuss diverging views on data governance and move up a gear our cooperation at bilateral and multilateral level to promote regulatory convergence and facilitate free flow of data. Likewise, the development of trustworthy artificial intelligence implies that efforts are made in both sides of the Atlantic towards ensuring a human-centric and transparent approach to AI. These, of course, are only some examples. The more pressing question now, in my view, is how to go about it. And it is precisely one of the reasons why I am looking forward to listening to our panelists and discuss with them, to have a discussion that will follow on how all this can be tackled. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pilar, and a warm welcome to all the panelists and participants this afternoon. And to set the scene really quickly in general, the trade relationship between the EU and the US is the world's largest trade relationship, worth over 1 trillion euros per year. So together we account for about a third of the world's trade and standards, and these numbers mean something. They underline the potential impact we can have when we work together, and not just on our own territories, but when done well, we can really leverage our impact also beyond the EU and the US. And we make natural allies thanks to our historic ties and shared values of human dignity, individual rights, and democratic principles. And additionally, we are facing the same global challenges, such as the current pandemic, climate change, and the digital transition of our societies. And finally, we increasingly face the challenges of rival systems of digital governments. And this context makes collaboration not just evident, but also really urgent. And the pandemic has brought us to a window of opportunity for renewed collaboration in the digital sphere. Organizations have been forced to digitalize at speed, and the digital transformation will be given a significant boost on both sides of the Atlantic due to the COVID recovery plans. And I believe it is an excellent time now, as Pilar also mentioned, to discuss the EU-US tech agenda. And I look forward to hearing from our panelists what their priorities are and what the tech governance framework should look like. And I have a few preliminary ideas that I would like to share, and I would be curious to hear your views on these. So first of all, the global data flows. Data has become the lifeline of many companies across sectors of the economy. Over 60% of the global GDP is digital, but this also extends to physical sectors such as agriculture and manufacturing. And after the recent Schrems judgments, we need to put all our efforts to finding a sustainable and durable solution that, without compromising the privacy of our citizens, obviously, offers businesses the legal certainty that they need to continue their business. Secondly, standardization and interoperability. New technologies come with new challenges, and we need to ensure that these respect our values and that products are interoperable. After all, the digital market is a global market, and I welcome the proposal for a transatlantic AI agreement in this respect. But I believe that the collaboration on standards should go further than just AI. Together, we can drive and stir discussions in international and multilateral forums when it comes to these. Then on the tech governance, I welcome the idea of the Trade and Tech Council to institutionalize the dialogue of both blocs. We have discussed this many times in INTA already. And I have, for example, a great interest in competition and platform regulations, which Pilar also mentioned. The DSA and the DMA are pieces of legislation that are likely to have an impact overseas as well. And vice versa, US Congress is looking into issues too. And it would be really a missed opportunity to implement measures without any dialogue. And lastly, the WTO. Our digital transition can only succeed if we keep a global perspective. And as I mentioned, we need cooperation with our strategic partners, the US, but we also have to look at setting the rules at the multilateral level. And when we look at the WTO, it should not only become ready for the green, but also the digital transition. And the recent trade policy review is calling for the conclusion of an ambitious and comprehensive WTO agreement on digital trade, including on data flows. And we indeed must play a central role in creating these rules for digital trade, but we should also encourage with like-minded partners in order to be able to show leadership on an international stage when negotiating these rules, and making sure that the WTO is fit for the digital age and that it suits our interests and values. So having said that, I will keep it at that, and I'm really looking forward to what the panelists have to say. So thank you very much.
Many thanks to both Pilar and Liesje for setting the scene so well for today's discussion and for putting forward so many ideas already for potential areas of cooperation. Peter Linton, over to you now.
Thank you, Maria Rosa. My remarks inevitably reflect my own experience over these many years of engagement with both TPN, Transatlantic Policy Network, and EIF. And this includes more recently the contributions that I and many others have made to the digital dimension of TPN's ongoing project towards Transatlantic Partnership 2030, which is well up and underway. I also remark that EIF will again this year be a sponsor of and a participant in TPN's Transatlantic Week, which will not take place in Washington as it has over many years, but which, as most of you know, will take place online in July, and in which digital-driven policy will have a prominent place. So we have that to look forward to and to prepare. It's evident that the climate for transatlantic cooperation has improved greatly over the past months since the US election, and offers us an opportunity, and it may be the last, to create and pursue a long-term EU-US partnership agenda. And it has likewise become evident that global digital transformation will be a driving force across this agenda. To make the most of this opportunity, experience makes clear that we need express political commitments on both sides to create it and pursue it. And more precisely, from an EIF and TPN point of view, this means express commitments from the US Congress on the one hand and the European Parliament on the other. Without such a shared legislator's call to action and commitment to it, our administrations will lack the necessary political foundation to build on. And because digital capabilities impact virtually every policy sphere where transatlantic partnership is vital for our futures, and indeed for the future of democratic governance around the world, the political commitment we seek must of needs be broad. We need to be clear on this and learn from past experience. Seeking transatlantic convergence on digital issues one by one in isolation without an overriding and broad political commitment from our legislative branches based on our explicit shared values for the digital age has proved over many years to be an exercise in frustration. The good news is that we have a model for what we need. The new transatlantic Agenda, or NTA, adopted by the EU and the US in 1995 with the strong support of TPN and endorsement by both Congress and the European Parliament, primarily as a response to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and still the only formalized agreement between the EU and the US. And on what has become our digital agenda, digital futures, the NTA is mute. It simply was not foreseen. Well, the digital revolution is every big as global a revolution as was the collapse of the bipolar world, and demands similar long-term thinking and leadership from Europe and the US. That's why we are all here today, not to indulge in an intellectual exercise, but to think about how EIF can help make this happen. Thank you, Maria Rosa.
Thank you, Peter. Very clear message, political commitment first. Let's now bring in our next speaker who has joined us in the meantime. Welcome, Rupert, Rupert Schlegelmilch with DigiTrade, European Commission.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Maria. And I'd like to thank also Pilar, Liesje, and Peter for setting the scene. And thank you for inviting me. I think what I heard so far really resonates what we are trying to do from the Commission and from the trade angle. And of course, all these policies we're discussing here today are not only trade issues. I mean, that's one of the challenges we have when we talk about digital. It covers a lot of ground, and this will come back to that, what the consequences I think that should have also for setting up dialogues and the work in the transatlantic sphere. But let me say something very obvious in the beginning, because sometimes when everybody talks about China and everything else, it's often forgotten. We are, the EU and the US are not only value partners, but we also are strong trade, investment, military and security partners. I think it's an obvious point that if you look at supply chains and technology, digital services, interconnection and these things, you will easily find where the deepest connections are, and they're obviously in the transatlantic partnership. I always hasten to say when people say China is the biggest trading partner of the EU, that's nonsense. It's on goods, it's not on services, it's not on investment, nothing else. So it's a very topical, small part of the relationship. But we have challenges, and one of them obviously is the digital transformation we're talking about now. There's also the climate issue. Those two issues are dominating the agenda of this commission, and they obviously have an enormous impact on our economies. And we have a number of challenges that we should address. Obviously, for our prosperity, the trading opportunities have always been very important. A smooth trade of services and goods across the Atlantic, reducing the barriers. That's classical, if you wish, DD trade stuff. But we have also other challenges, and those are the technological leadership, getting the most out of it by having open markets and making sure that in all of that our values prime. And this is sometimes a choice you have to make. We'll come to that maybe when we talk about export controls and investment screening, this sort of thing. We have been very clear to the new administration, which I think has a very open mind on these issues, that we need the political will, the political commitment that Peter and others have just mentioned. I think this is something transatlantic cooperation to some extent happens by itself because our citizens talk, they interact, and many, and our stakeholders interact. But when it comes to regulation and trade rules and this sort of thing, political will matters enormously because many of the stakeholders that we want to cooperate more, talking about standards, it was mentioned already, II standards, Internet of Things, these things, many of the regulators need that political backing and push, because otherwise they will do what they do best, is regulating their home turf, their home market, the internal market, or the huge American market, just to give you a comparison. So what we need is to have a coordination, and this is why President von der Leyen has put forward this idea of a technology council. What we want is a real top-down approach to coordinate these positions and work towards convergence on standards, on regulations, but also when it comes to possible frictions. And there are frictions because sometimes also because of geography and history. Think Nord Stream 2 or other things, we don't always have the same outlook into the world. So when there are frictions, there's also, I think, a real work to be done on reducing them. And in the digital sphere, this relates to also issues like how to regulate platforms, very different views until very recently, at least, slowly converging, I think. Same as slowly converging on the wretched issue of privacy, where we had a number of hiccups, as you all know. Again, here, doing something on converging rather than trying to just deal with it through the courts is obviously the name of the game. Now, if we don't do that, and here I don't want to say sound like doomsday, but we don't do that, the EU and the US separately will become, or at least there is a danger to become rule takers rather than rule makers. We're all in this very comfortable position, the Brussels effect, the huge American, if you wish, impact on the world. It might be one day history if you look at the way the tectonic shifts in the world economy are happening. So standards and regulation coordination is not just la pour la or something that we want to do because bureaucrats like to do this sort of thing, but it has a real impact on the future markets, on whose idea, including the ideas when you come to the borders of what should be permissible and not, should be regulated. And we don't want, the worst thing we could do is have a digital border between the Atlantic in a sort of multipolar digital world. We already have a Chinese internet, a Russian internet. We don't need a separate US and Europe internet on top of that. And I'm not talking about other players who also try to sort of cordon themselves off from some parts of the digital data flows. So, and of course, you need to, in this impact in particular, talk about the Chinese quest for certain dominance. I think we can call it that, or at least independence technology, but also dominance in some areas. And this is where I think we also have a joint duty to define our democratic principles in the digital world. Yeah, and that now comes to the fact that I already mentioned in the past. If you want to do that, you have to have a joint view on what kind of technology you want to share and transfer, what kind of technology you actually want to protect because of critical dual use, what kind of technology you want to allow in your markets. Think 5G, the discussions we're having today, every day. That means if we do that in piecemeal fashion, it's not going to be effective, also because of the interconnection between our networks. So even if you can see that in the EU, if you can't have a 5G policy for one country, it's just not working. And you can't have it probably also not across the transatlantic on the long hand. So, those are the issues that I wanted to throw out in the beginning. There is another issue which is now coming out very strongly, which is the whole question of supply chain resilience, which is linked to all of these discussions, because why do you want to be resilient? Because you don't want to be dependent. And that has consequences as well for how you deal with your trade. And that goes also into this area of export control and investment screening, but it has more than that. Safe supply for raw materials, safe supply for semiconductors, a very topical issue right now, where we are in the EU trying to do our best to catch up on some issues where we lag behind. But also, I think coordination on high tech, if you wish, vaccines are high tech as well. I mean, they're technology, certainly. And we have had actually, if you talk about regulation, quite some promising attempts to make it easier for our companies in the pharmaceutical sector. That's not necessarily a trade and technology issue that comes to mind immediately, but it's certainly a technology issue where even simple things as respecting each other's GMP, good manufacturing practices, and so on for these products make a lot of sense. Not to speak about the ingredients of vaccines, because vaccines, as you know, are quite very complicated supply chains. To make sure these supply chains stay open and we know what we're doing without cutting each other off from some of these. And I think you're pretty much aware of what I'm talking about, given the experience of the last couple of months. Now, one issue, and I'll be brief now. One issue I wanted to say is this is not something that should be couched in a them transatlantic versus the rest of the others. I think we really have to play our strength, not so much our defense, which we also have to play. I mentioned that now a number of times, but really also make sure that the openness that are such a sign of distinction of our markets, and the rule of law and the level playing field, these are strengths that most players in the world actually like, because they all want to compete on an equal footing, and they don't want to be dwarfed by either of the giants. So we have to do that as well, and this is where the WTO and the question, what can we actually do in a global world, comes in, not only, but also, and I will just mention it because it's part of my pay to mention the open strategic economy process, which we have in this regard. I would just want to say that from a trading perspective, we talk about open strategic autonomy, not strategic autonomy as such. It doesn't make sense for us because we won't be autonomous just by doing it all ourselves. It's just not going to happen. So that doesn't mean we are naive and that we don't protect ourselves when we have to, but this surgical piece of our work is the one where we have to coordinate much better as not to sort of work to cross purposes. So that's what I wanted to say as an opening for this debate. This is where DG Trade and the Commission is coming from. Strong coordination in the Tech Council, a lot of good top-down, I think, more coordination work based on shared democratic principles. And of course, we hope that the summit in 3 weeks' time will actually deliver a real political impetus to bring this work forward. And I haven't talked about the Parliament yet, but I think that has all been said by Peter and others. I think we need all stakeholders in the EU, all institutions, I think are ready for that as far as I can see. And that's actually a very good sign because we stand together in our offer to the United States on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rupert, for sharing your views and providing a very comprehensive overview on your work, the work of the European Commission on this front. But let's bring in the point of view of the counterpart from the US. So let's go across the pond with Stephen Anderson.
Well, great. Thank you very much. I'd start by saying it really is refreshing to feel all of these transatlantic winds blowing in our direction. It really does bode well for cooperation on these issues and all of the other issues that we have to face in the transatlantic agenda. Of course, technology diplomacy and collaboration across the transatlantic relationship are going to be crucial for our economies and for the ability of Europe and the United States to deliver benefits to our middle-class families and the workers who sort of form the base of our countries. And the first point that I wanted to stress is that the United States and the European Union have a deep and enduring partnership on advancing the digital economy and digital transformation. We together share a positive vision of technology as a force for good, supporting the flourishing of our citizens and the people all over the world. The Biden-Harris administration is absolutely committed to revitalizing and raising the level of ambition in the transatlantic relationship, including on digital technology issues. Together, we can ensure technology is used to promote our values and to tackle the most pressing challenges, including the climate crisis. On both sides of the Atlantic, our governments are revisiting and updating some of our approaches to the technology sector, as the people before me have already spoken, including on competition policy and platform regulations. Say now more than ever, we must join forces to learn from each other as we strive together not only to unleash the full potential of new technologies, but also to avoid disruptions that could be harmful to companies and to consumers. So I know that in Europe there's a focus on strengthening autonomy and on digital and technology issues, and I was very refreshed to hear some of the comments that Rupert made on it, and I think we would agree. In the United States, we believe that stronger partners make us stronger, and so we like to see that Europe is investing in its future, as we also are investing in our technology capabilities. And of course, the European Union, like all our partners, should protect against malign influences from those who do not share our values. But at the same time, we hope that Europe's interest in strengthening autonomy does not imply a third way, when the reality, as I think the speakers before me have said, is that the US and Europe share many common values and principles when compared to the People's Republic of China and other countries like that, whose vision of technology governance is different, very different from ours. We believe the United States and Europe are closely aligned and that we have a joint and shared approach to technology, one that is dramatically different from that of the People's Republic of China. We should have no illusions about the PRC's objectives, which are to undercut our long-standing technological advantage and to displace our model's commitment to respecting human rights, privacy, and innovation with an authoritarian vision. The United States and Europe must cooperate to strengthen our technological capabilities and promote our shared values and vision in order to ensure that this authoritarian approach does not gain greater influence throughout the world. Now, let me just briefly mention two areas where I think that we can put this into practice, though I think that all of the areas that the speakers before me have mentioned are ripe for cooperation between the United States and Europe. The first that I wanted to mention is 5G wireless networks and the need to fully exclude untrustworthy and high-risk suppliers, regardless of national origin, from providing 5G equipment and software. The stakes, quite simply, for ensuring the security of these networks could not be higher. 5G is transformative and will touch every aspect of our lives. Now, we are extremely pleased that many European nations have implemented national measures to exclude untrusted vendors from their 5G networks, in line with the EU 5G toolbox and the Prague proposals. And we will continue to work with European allies and partners to ensure countries and citizens can trust that 5G equipment and software will not introduce risks that threaten national security, privacy, human rights, and business proprietary data. At the same time, we also have an opportunity right now to promote vendor diversity through support for Open RAN technologies. The second issue is increasing cooperation on technical standards, working with like-minded partners, including industry and stakeholders, to protect the existing voluntary, open, and market-driven approach. Good technical standards promote interoperability, innovation, competition, but we've also seen recent examples of authoritarian states trying to influence standard-setting bodies for their own purposes. And in order to build on this dialogue regarding transatlantic cooperation on digital transformation, I want to mention that Secretary Blinken recently announced US support for the candidacy of Doreen Bogdan-Martin to become the next Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union, or ITU. Ms. Bogdan-Martin is a deeply experienced expert on global communications issues who has served at the ITU for 28 years. If elected, Ms. Bogdan-Martin would be the first woman to lead the ITU, an organization critical for the future of information and communication technologies and to closing digital divides. Responsible, forward-looking, and transparent leadership of the ITU is vital to our shared interests, and so I hope that many of you will also join us in supporting Doreen's candidacy. In closing, I just want to underline that this is an exciting time for transatlantic technology cooperation. I know we are all looking forward to the visit of President Biden to Brussels, as has already been mentioned, and I'm sure that many of these issues will be discussed. I know there's going to be a lot of work on technology and trade, and I look forward at the technical level to following up on what I'm sure will be a big political push for us to do that. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It is indeed a very crucial time. Let's now hear from Nate Tibbits with Qualcomm from a business perspective.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'd like to thank the European Internet Forum, especially our honorable members of European Parliament for their leadership, and Maria Rosa for your critical role in building a bridge between the private sector and European politicians. I think it's really important to promote and preserve constructive international dialogues like today's discussion, and I'm delighted to be representing the private sector here. You know, as we begin to emerge from a COVID crisis, there is one key lesson that's very clear. The more people and countries and companies that coordinated and cooperated, the better they performed. And the best responses to the pandemic came from international efforts rooted in mutual respect for science and promotion of innovation. I'm really encouraged by the European Union's call for a high-level Trade and Technology Council to ensure the US and EU are working together to harness 5G and other technologies to drive economic recovery and innovation. The European and American economies, as has been mentioned previously, have long benefited from this kind of technology diplomacy, which is both an extension of our shared US and European values and an economic force multiplier that really demonstrates how much these values and the rule of law reward nations that adopt them. This is the kind of international cooperation that's part of Qualcomm's DNA. Through our engineering breakthroughs, we've been a driving force behind wireless innovation and standards alongside key European partners for more than 3 decades. And recently, we've even powered the Ingenuity helicopter, a drone that Perseverance has carried to the surface of Mars in collaboration with NASA. So I think you can see how this goes really to the heart of what we do at Qualcomm. You know, just to make a couple quick points and not be repetitive of what others said, and so we have time to get to questions. For us, we really look at how openness of international standards is critical to the future for EU innovation and how that underpins all of industries. You know, it's an important place where Europe is a leading innovator and has real technical expertise. And it's really important to note that 5G is becoming one of those core technological foundations on which our economies and societies will be built. Each new 5G related job is expected to generate 1.8 jobs in the broader economy, according to a recent study that Accenture did in partnership with Qualcomm. Just to give you a sense of scale, that's potentially 16 million new or transformed American jobs and 20 million jobs in Europe over the next 5 years. So we see that opportunity as absolutely critical. Of course, we are focused on issues in automotive and supply chain and security and other things that I think will be discussed. But we really hope that coming out of this, that there is a chance to for countries to achieve more autonomy and sovereignty in the semiconductor space, and as well to use competitiveness to strengthen our relationships and this ecosystem. So maybe what I will just say is, in a quick conclusion, is that actions on both sides of the Atlantic ought to be based on truths understood from Washington to Brussels and Berlin or Paris to San Diego, where Qualcomm is located. The more a city or country or region can stimulate talent and innovation among its people, the more competitive its economy will be, and healthy competition, I think, benefits all of us. In this spirit, we think the transatlantic partnership is vital, and building a new consensus between the EU and US collaboration will not only enhance each region's strategic position, but also promote shared democratic values around the world. Ready to stop there and happy to answer any questions that may come up. Thank you, Maria Rosa.